Hey everyone, Lance here. I've gotten my hands on an M.2 drive and the PCI Express lane involvement is something I wanted to talk about. I have an Intel i7-4790 and since the processor only has 16 PCI Express lanes, and I see questions around this sort of scenario online quite a lot, and most of the times the answers make it more confusing to understand. I'm running two 980 Ti's in SLI, so of course my GPUs are running in an 8x configuration, and that's all the PCI Express lanes my CPU has used. And obviously GPUs are designed to use a 16x slot, but with a CPU that only has 16 lanes, it means that the GPUs are running at 8x speeds rather than 16. From what you'll probably find online, this is only about a 5% performance loss, but I mean that is a whole nother subject matter altogether. But now of course the M.2 drive needs some lanes, and this is where it gets really confusing. So my CPU, or my motherboard, is a Z97 chipset which uses a PCH, or a platform controller hub, and this adds some more lanes. Looking at the Intel chipset page, you can see under the expansion options, you can see the lanes that the PCH adds, and under the I/O specifications you'll see what the CPU has. So I get an extra 8 PCI Express 2.0 lanes with my PCH, or the PCH in my chipset. The M.2 drive that I have is PCI Express 3.0, but only the CPU has PCI Express 3.0 lanes. So I'm not going to get full performance, but they are backwards compatible and I should get better performance than my SATA connected SSD. Also keep in mind that the slots on the motherboard will depend on whether that lane is connected to the CPU or if it's connected to the PCH. So there's never going to be any changeover. There are motherboards with things like a PLX chip, but I haven't done too much reading into that and it's not really too relevant for what I'm getting at here in this video. Now if you have a Skylake processor, you'll also only have 16 PCI Express lanes in the CPU. So you're in a similar boat to me, but you get 20 additional lanes in the PCH if you have a Z170 chipset. Anyways, basically there's so much information, and the general person, this would cause more confusion and probably not really answer their question around whether they can run SLI and an M.2 drive. I decided to test if there was any graphical performance decrease by using this as my boot drive, and if the drive performance was worth any potential trade-off, because obviously if you're running SLI you're probably wanting as much graphics performance as possible, so you don't want to be adding an M.2 drive and then having that affect your graphics performance. So I'm going to run some benchmarks, and for anyone that is interested or wants solid evidence, you'll get to see my numbers soon. Now the bits I have are a Samsung Evo 950 NVMe M.2 drive. This is just an OEM drive, so it's just that plain green, not the nice Samsung black M.2 drive. Like I said earlier, it's a PCI Express 3.0 drive designed to run at 4x speeds, and it's 128GB in capacity. My current drive is a SATA Samsung 850 Evo, and that's 500GB, but I haven't used more than 128GB of storage. So basically for the testing methodology, I'm going to clone the drive across, and first things first, I'll run Tech PowerUp's GPU-Z to validate that the graphics cards are still both running at 8x speeds and PCI Express 3.0. And currently I have tested this, and whether the M.2 is in the system or not, I've got the BIOS set to run Gen 3 for PCI Express, which should force the cards to run 3.0 speeds. By the way, I've got an ASUS Maximus 7 Ranger Z97 motherboard for anyone interested. And once the drive is cloned, I'm going to run disk benchmarks in Crystal Disk Mark and Samsung's surprisingly good Samsung Magician. That's quite good. I've used it to update the firmware on the drive, so they're both running the latest firmware. And then I'm going to run some graphics benchmarks to see if the GPU performance is affected at all. So when I'm running the tests on the SATA drive, of course the M.2 drive is going to be completely out of the system. So I think that's enough talking for now. Let's get to the numbers. I've done way more testing than I first planned, mostly due to the huge difference in numbers for M.2 last night. It seems the latest NVIDIA drivers broke SLI for me in that game, and only one of the drives had those drivers, and the other drive had the old drivers. So I kind of caught on because I knew what my numbers were like previously, so I updated the drivers on both, and then I decided to rerun all my tests fresh, just to be safe. So I ran each test 5 times and averaged the numbers to get the final results you guys just saw. Now also, to avoid thermal throttling, I took the top off the case, which you can see, and also the front off the case. As people with this case will know, it's not the best for airflow, especially when you're water cooling. I do have some ideas to try and address that, and that might be coming in a future video, so if you're interested in that, definitely keep your eyes peeled. And while setting the M.2 drive up, I have found that it was actually an AHCI based drive, not an NVMe drive. This is on loan from a friend, and he only recently bought this, so I think he may have been scammed or sent the wrong drive. But the correct drive is the MZHPV model, whereas there's an MZHPH, and that sort of dictates what drive it is. But this was a test to test SLI and not necessarily drive performance over a SATA drive, so it was more just a test of whether you'd lose speed with 2 cards in SLI if you added something else that used PCI Express. So the drive itself doesn't matter too much. One last thing to note is my motherboard still uses the SATA controller for M.2 drives and also doesn't have SATA Express. So I only got a maximum of 6 gigabits per second. So I get very little performance gain from an M.2 on this platform. Some people with Skylake, they may get better performance, or if you're running Skylake, you'll probably get better performance than me with this setup. And I also thought it was worth mentioning that my GPUs are both running at stock clocks, and my CPU has 105 base clock overclock. So it's not a KSQ CPU, so I'm very limited with what I can do. But anyway, for all the people that were just confused by the technical ins and outs of this, I hope seeing the numbers for yourself sort of proves to you how the performance will be affected and how it's going to affect you, and maybe it's helped you make a decision on whether you want to buy one of these little M.2 drives. And that's about all I wanted to cover in this video, guys. I do thank you all a lot for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. I'll also post links to my Twitter and Instagram down in the description box, so feel free to follow me on those as well. But hey, I'll see you on the next one.